September 29th, 2023, and the time is 8:32 a.m. I am calling this meeting to order, and we will go ahead and have each entity call their own meeting to order. So we'll start with Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board. Steph, roll call.
City of Hayden,
Here.
Hayden Lake Sewer District,
Here.
and Kootenai County.
Here. All right, Kootenai County is here. Commissioners Matari and Duncan, and Commissioner Brooks is excused. And City of Hayden.
Abby, roll call, please.
Council President Roder,
Here.
Councilmember Satterfield,
Yes.
Councilmember DePriest,
Here.
and Councilmember White here, and Mayor Purcell.
All right, and the district, please.
Here.
Chairman Coleman,
Here.
Board Member Will Neal,
Here.
Board Member Barb Neal,
Here.
Board Member Harvey,
Here.
and Board Member Gil Rugner.
Here.
All right, are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead with introductions. And for Kootenai County, we actually have Phil Cummings, and he's working at our airport right now. And we've got Gaston Patterson, our interim director for the airport, Commissioner Matari, Commissioner Duncan, and our legal counsel, Dave Ferguson. So this district?
We have Tina, our clerk, our administrator. We have Michael, our attorney. And I don't see. That's it. That's it.
I want to say,
Oh, yes, and when you speak, please make sure that you've got a little green light. All right, and City of Hayden.
I'm Scott Purcell, the mayor of Hayden, and I'd like, starting with Natasha, working around the room, if you could introduce yourselves, please.
Natasha Lang, City Treasurer.
Alan Sottling, Public Works Director, City of Hayden.
Rep Ware, City Administrator.
Roger Satterfield, I'm on the sewer board as well as city council.
Matt Roder, I'm on the city council and I'm
I'm Sandra White. I'm on the City Council.
Maybe Priest, I'm on City Council.
Well, I'm Danielle Quaid. I'm bond counsel to Hayden and to the district.
All right, great. And then for Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board, I am the current chair. And then we have Ken Windrum here. We also have Steph Oliver. We have our attorney here, Ben Allen, and he's had a little dental work done, so we'll have to listen really hard when he speaks to us. So, and we have Jim, and then Barb is our backup, and I don't even know who our backup is. Nobody ever comes to it. Bill? Is it Bruce or Bill?
You know, I don't know.
Well,
Has ever come.
Okay, I'm glad nothing happens to me. So, and then we already heard from Roger and Matt. So that was the sewer board. All right, we'll start with our business items. And the first one is update of information since March 17th, 2023. And we'll start with the City of Hayden.
So the city has engaged FCS. For the last meeting, we had agreed to actually do a rate study. If there was dissolution, what would the effect of that be on the rates? And so the council approved and agreed to pay for that. And as we got discussing further, the issue of property and the dissolution came up and was a concern. And so before spending the larger dollars on that full report, we did a side report to have the issue of property in the dissolution looked at. And we also have Gordon Wilson, who authored that, is online too, to kind of go through that here in a few minutes. And so since then, that's what we've looked at, and I think that's one of the issues for discussion this morning. Yeah.
We have waited, of course, for the rate study and other things, and understand that they are delayed. We've reviewed the FCS property disposition paper, and while we agree with many of the things in there, there's some questions we have. We also reviewed several different examples of districts discharging into a municipal wastewater system and cities discharging into municipal wastewater systems, and how they handle rates and expansions and so on and so forth. And then we've had a lot of discussions as to the capital expenses that have been paid by the district over the past 30 years, since 1985, and how that will impact the future going forward. Because while we near as I can tell through my calculations, the district is contributed 32 to 35, 36% of the capital cost of the treatment plant over the years. We are currently only 22% of the ongoing flows, and in the future, probably much less than that. So, how do we recoup some of those capital investments?
Okay, so is that all for the district? Okay, thank you. And Kootenai County is honestly just here to support the entities at this point and facilitate anything we can. So I don't know, Bruce, did you have anything to add right now?
No.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Item 2, discussion points for today's meeting, and our moderator, Mr. Allen, would you like to give that a try and make sure he has a microphone? Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Ms. Duncan. As was already alluded to, I've got a mouthful of stitches this morning. So my request for the group is that you make my job easy, defer to others who already have the floor, and do your best to simply be respectful. The purpose of today's meeting as a follow-up to our series of dissolution discussions is really to bring matters out to the forefront of the floor that each entity views as pertinent to a possible dissolution or a review of the assets toward dissolution. I know, Brett, you already alluded to the FCS study, but I think that that's probably going to be our starting point for today's discussions. I think diving into that and addressing not only the study from the city's perspective, but then switching over and hearing the district's additional questions or follow-up that they have regarding the study and its ultimate conclusions is going to be the really driving point for today's discussions. So I see on A, we do have the FCS property disposition paper as item number 1. I don't know if you want to take it from there and really dive into what the contents of that was and the significance of it from the city's perspective, and then turn it over for additional analysis. But I think that's probably a good starting point for this morning.
Okay, I think that is probably the best point to start with, and we thought it would be appropriate to have Gordon Wilson online, and also Angie Sanchez, who both of them are with FCS group, and they do a lot of financial analysis, and Gordon authored that report. And so I think going through that, kind of hitting the high points, what it means, and that having that discussion is great. Can he, Jonathan, he's online, can you help him be able to speak? Okay.
I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you'd like, I can walk through some of the basic points in my memo. Would that be good?
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, good. It starts with an important assumption about the nature of the change that's being considered. So I'm assuming that it's not the type of liquidation and distribution dissolution that is addressed in the Section 8C of the current JPA agreement. We're not selling to some outside party. There's no money to be generated and distributed. It will still, the current operation will still continue. It would be a dissolution of the current ownership structure, but not the ending of HARS as a regional wastewater plant. All of the customers would still be the customers, would still be providing the service. So it's a change in the nature of the ownership, but not, you're not getting rid of it. It's not going anywhere. So that's my understanding about it. Now that has some implications. And before I get to the question of property, I just wanted to explore those implications just so you understand my point on that subject. There would need to be another agreement, and wholesale wastewater disposal agreements are very common. And because wastewater tends to flow in basins through gravity lines, it's very common to have one entity providing treatment service for another entity that provides collection services. So that's a familiar setup. And even if you transfer the nature of the agreement from so that the district and the county go from being co-owners to being wholesale customers, there's still a relationship, and there still needs to be an agreement. And there are plenty of things to negotiate in creating that agreement. And I've helped jurisdictions create agreements like that in the past. For example, a wholesale customer who helped build the original system, which the district, and that's a set of facts that applies to the district and the county, could negotiate to be guaranteed to have insider rights in rate making on par with city residents, so that the people in the district and the county, your end customers, could never be charged more than the city's own customers. You have the right to be treated as though you're insiders because you helped build the system. That's the whole point. That would be a provision in a wholesale wastewater disposal agreement. Now, at the same time, the owner has to have flexibility to be an owner. They've got to be able to take risks and make decisions and set the rates and issue debt and recover the costs that are incurred from the debt and address regulatory concerns. They're on the hook. The owner is on the hook in a way that the wholesale customers are not. So there's a natural narrowing of interest on the part of the people who used to be co-owners and now would be wholesale customers. Most of what a customer does is pay money and to make sure the owner does what they agreed to do. And they don't have to, the customer doesn't have to be involved in the management decisions. They don't have to hire people. They don't have to keep the regulators happy. They don't have to obtain capital financing. But they have to pay money and in accordance with the terms of the agreement. So if that assumption about the nature of the change is accurate, and bear in mind, I haven't been involved in these discussions up till now, so I don't, if that assumption is wrong, you can certainly correct me. But if that's accurate, it has an implication that this is not like, the situation is not like selling a fractional interest in a piece of property that can be developed to generate a profit. So the analogy to a private business co-owner buying out the other partners, that's a flawed analogy. And it's something that easily comes to mind, but it's not applicable in this case. One reason is that this is not a profit-making entity. There's no profit to distribute. All of the money to run the system will still come from the same customers who are still connected, and indirectly from their ratepayers. So if the original co-owners were to, liquidate or to sell, receive cash for their percentage share of the investment, then it would simply mean that the original owners would have to pay higher rates in the future. The city would have to get it back somehow because they're not a profit-making entity. There's no stockholders to lean harder on. It all comes from ratepayers. Now, there's another reason that the private business transaction is a poor metaphor, and it comes from the fact that buying out the other partners really means that the other partners are liquidating their interest. And in a private business deal, once the partners sell their ownership interest for cash, they have no further rights. Right now, the district and the county are original investors. We took the risk of building the plant back when it was new. And unless you liquidate your investment, you have a legitimate claim to parity status with the city. You can rightfully insist that your customers not be charged any more than inside city customers. I believe that insider status is a valuable right. And because the district and county will continue to be customers, their flows are still going to the same treatment plant. They'll still depend on HARSB to treat the wastewater flows in the future. You're not truly walking away and disengaging from the treatment business. And I think that over the long term, the parity right is more valuable to you than any temporary benefit that might come from liquidating the initial investment for cash. So if that assumption is correct, then it's in the interest of all three parties to minimize the transaction cost. And if you decide to make this change, and there might be good reasons to do that. I can picture a few reasons it could make sense, possibly for the sake of streamlined management or decision making, control over future growth, clear accountability, other reasons like that. But it's not primarily an economic deal. That's the motivation isn't essentially economic because the city's not making a profit, and for the district and county, the long-term rights are more valuable in cash. It's primarily to restructure the responsibilities and the rights that go with ownership and narrow the interest of the two other parties that they can be assured of fair treatment in the future and not have the headaches that come from running a treatment plant. So that's kind of the first part of my analysis. Trying to think through what's in their interest if you go through with this deal, and then I came to the treatment of land, because that question arose, and Brett explained that to me when he met with me. That ours has some land that it serves as a reuse farm for a land application of the biosolids. And the question is whether that land should be appraised and whether the city should pay the other parties a proportionate share of the cost of the appraised value of the land. And so I was asked to do some research, and I did, and I focused on my own experience. I've been in this business for a long enough time that I thought I don't need to, do a survey. I decided to look at all of the changes to regional partnerships or utility ownership that I've been involved with over the past years, and I came up with about 25 different instances where there has been a change to a regional partnership or the ownership of a water or sewer utility. In some cases, the changes actually took place. In some cases, they were contemplated but not carried out. You know, big changes like this don't always go through. But sometimes one of the parties was a privately owned utility, but almost always there was at least one publicly owned local government entity. Sometimes the changes would have been a transfer of ownership. In other cases, what was contemplated was a major change to the contractual terms that defined the relationship between the parties. So, and I've played a variety of roles. I've done utility appraisals, I've drafted wholesale agreements, I've developed financial models to evaluate the impact of changes. And these changes are focused on the Northwest, mostly Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, and California. And in fact, only one instance in Idaho and Alaska, and most of my other experience has been in Washington, Oregon, and California. This type of thing doesn't happen all that often. So there are a lot of data points for either new partnerships or dissolutions of partnerships. So we have to go with what we have. I look back through all those cases, and in none of those instances was land treated any differently from any of the other assets. So whether it's a best practice or not, best is a tricky word to try to nail down. But I can say it is not a common practice to think of the land any differently than other assets. And by the way, I mentioned that I've done utility appraisals. I do not do land appraisals. Whenever the land has been part of the transfer, I've subcontracted with land appraisers. I'm the business appraisal person. Utilities are a subset of business, a going concern business. But again, that would apply in a case where you're actually selling the business. In this case, the business is continuing. It's not being sold to an outside party. It's the ownership and management is being restructured. Now, could there conceivably be a reason to treat the land differently? And I would say only if the land were surplus. And in that case, it could be sold and the proceeds could be distributed to the parties in proportion to their original investment at the time. And as the district representative mentioned just now, the original investment percentages might have been different from the current proportion of the current flows. And if there were to be a distribution of the proceeds from the sale of surplus land, then you could take that into account. But if it's not surplus, then there's no point for there to be any exchange of cash. It's very analogous to a surplus vehicle or a surplus piece of equipment. If it's being used, then keep using it. Now, and my understanding, the best information I had was that it's still being used. Now, because land is a marketable asset that does not depreciate, there might be some sensitivity about the possibility that it could be sold at some future date, could become surplus. And to that concern, I'd suggest that the transfer agreement, it would be okay to include in the transfer agreement a provision that if the land is sold within some reasonable time frame, I'd suggest 10 years, that the proceeds must be deposited in a dedicated fund and used only for the improvement or operation of the wastewater treatment plant. That way, the fund balances from the proceeds would offset the rates that the wholesalers and the retailers, that the rates that would be paid by all the people who are now paying rates. Those future rates would be offset by the proceeds from any future land. Now, my guess is that is would want to sell some land that belongs to it, and it was used for wastewater treatment operations and then use it to pad the general fund. I've never seen that kind of a situation in the Northwest. So I don't think it'd be an inconvenience to the city to offer that as a formal commitment as part of the transfer agreement. And I'm suggesting a 10-year limit just because when the time horizon goes out very far, then the administrative cost of ensuring compliance can outweigh the benefits of a just-in-case provision in a contractual agreement. But either way, doing a land appraisal at this time doesn't make sense because the thing that matters is not what somebody thinks the land is worth right now. It's what the land would actually be worth at some potential future date when it was actually sold. So, and so it doesn't matter what an appraiser thinks right now if the land is not surplus right now. What matters is what happens in the future if and when the land is declared surplus and is sold. And now, when that happens, of course, one alternative would be for the city to distribute the proceeds to the original co-owners. But because any treatment plant just requires a steady stream of capital improvements, I don't think it would be, I think it would be even more logical for the city to say, we're going to plow those proceeds back into the improvement of the plant, because it's going to need it. So, but until it needs it, we'll dedicate those proceeds. And so you can be sure that it will offset your future rates. So that's my suggestion on the land. But there's no reason to treat it separately, but because it doesn't depreciate, and if there's some concern that it could become surplus in the future, then it shouldn't be controversial to add a provision that dedicates the potential proceeds from the sale of land, if and when that occurs, to the plant itself. So that's my suggestion on the treatment of the land. And so I'm open to questions right now.
All right, we'll start with the district.
Well, I agree with most of what you said. I think that that there's one issue that I don't know that you have addressed, and maybe you can speak to it. Is that the district and the city has and will continue to sell capacity to new users through capitalization fees or whatever the case may be. That money gets put back into the treatment plant in the form of reducing in the form of replacement and reducing user rates. Because the district has in fact put more money into the capital than they will ever recoup through capitalization fees, simply because the district is not growing nearly as rapidly or has potential to grow as the city does. That means that the city is going to be collecting capitalization fees on the treatment plant that may proportionally have to go back to the district, whether that be in cash or reduced rates or whatever the case may be. I'd like you to speak to that.
Okay. If I will slow, it's because I'm taking notes. I'll try to respond, and if I don't quite get to the angle you're asking about, please let me know. Let's assume the city will receive cap fees from future development. And if the city owns the whole thing, the city will receive all the cap fees. Let's say that 90% of the future growth is in the city. If those cap fees are dedicated to the treatment plant, then 100% of those cap fees result in an offset to the rates that the district, the airport, and everybody pays. As long as you have insider rights, as long as you have parity with city customers. And the parity gives you the assurance that you might have to raise rates in the future. You don't like that, nobody likes that. But they're only raising rates for you if they're raising rates for their own people. There's that kind of underlying incentive. You know they have incentive to not raise rates because it's not good for their own citizens. And that would be the constraint on their instinct to raise rates on you. And then you're thinking, well, what's the benefit of having invested in it? The investment is what gives you that right. And as far as the cap fees, the revenue from the cap fees in the future, as long as the city can't divert them into some, general fund purpose or, parks or even a water system or streets or anything like that, as long as it has to go toward reinvestment in the treatment plant and not even the city's own collection system. You can say cap fees related to the treatment plant have to be reinvested in the treatment plant. Then you know that it's going to offset your rates, and that's what you want. So I don't think it's much different than the hypothetical scenario about selling the land. Unless I'm misunderstanding something about the capacity fees. Does that help?
Well, I think that is partly what I tried to get across, but in the past, and I don't know that this is going to continue in the future, but in the past, cap fees have been used for upgrades, replacement, and expansion of capacity. And it's that expansion of capacity that the district probably would not benefit from that probably concerns me the most. And the fact that if the city agrees that the district becomes an insider and the wholesale rates reflect that insider status, I think we can probably get past, at least my opinion is that we can get past the cap fee differential through rate adjustments accordingly. Not necessarily on parity, but maybe on an insider basis.
If the cap fee, if 90%, just hypothetically, if 90% of the cap fee revenue is coming inside the city, and the need for expansion comes from 90% inside the city, I'm having a hard time seeing what the problem is in terms of equity.
Well, let me use actual numbers, and Ken can correct me if I'm wrong. But currently, the treatment plant is designed for 2 million gallons a day capacity, with some minor improvements. It can go to 2.4. Maybe not minor, but improvements. It can go to 2.4 million gallons per day. Currently, the district is using roughly 0.25 million gallons, a quarter of a million gallons a day of capacity in that treatment plant, which leaves the city with 750,000 gallons of capacity that they can and I don't know what the city's current capacity is or capacity use, but I guess it's probably close to 0.78 million gallons a day. So they roughly have 1 million gallons of capacity that they can, in fact, that's already bought and paid for, that they can then bring new users in to use it. And 34 to 36% of that capacity has already been paid for by the district through cash, but there's also been about 30% of the cost of that treatment plant has been already in prepaid or ongoing capitalization fees. So there's, in my opinion, our investment is much, and our ability to recoup that investment with a dissolution is very difficult. Is something that I think needs to be addressed. And if it's just as simple as, we get a special rate because we've invested in this plant so heavily, that's okay. I just need some assurance for our ratepayers and our taxpayers, because we do collect taxes for our district, that this is going to be an equitable dissolution.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody would agree with your last statement. Everybody needs to have confidence that it's equitable. I'm thinking about the situation that you described, where the growth rates have varied.
Yeah. So Gordon?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Danielle Quaid has a question for you.
Okay.
Sorry, I had to get a different mic. What I'm confused about is your statement about 34 to 38% of the capacity being paid for by the district, because in the financing that we've all been working on for the last 10 years, no capacity was paid for by the district. So can you clarify what you mean?
Yeah, this whole HARSB started in 1985, and in 1985 there was a little bit of money being spent. Total, Kootenai County had by far the biggest, one of the biggest investments in that 1985. But in 1987, when the treatment plant was first built, which included the oxidation ditches, the headworks, so on and so forth, the district spent $2.6 million. City spent $350,000. The county spent nothing on that capacity. That capacity still exists and is still being used at HARSB.
But I guess my confusion with that is that capacity doesn't meet the permit, right? I mean, that capacity, that investment,
yeah, let me finish.
Doesn't meet the permit. So
let me finish. So in 2016, when they did phase one to upgrade it for the permit, the district's portion of that was again 34%.
Is that right, Stephanie? I don't think that is correct.
Well,
They paid the $6 million in, but for the contract, they front-loaded the cost of the project so they could close their LID. Out of the $24 million project, they paid $6 million.
that wasn't the phase one project.
In 2016 is the phase one for the DNR.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is, well, phase one, district, according to the records I got from Stephanie, district invested $4.2 million, city invested $4.9 million, HARSB invested $5 million.
When did we fix the contributions? Because we fixed the percentage of contribution for phase one in 2013 for phase one. Okay, and then for phase two, we fixed them in.
We changed it because of the growth that was going in the city, and that changed in 2018.
Well, I think we can discuss that offline and as part of the agreement. But what I'm saying is that there's still, no matter how you calculate it, there's a disproportionate amount of money in reserve capacity that's been paid for by the district, and we will never use that reserve capacity.
I guess that I don't agree with that because I've been tracking the project very specifically on the basis of the permit components, the replacement components, and the expansion components. And we very carefully made sure that the district could not and did not pay for expansion components because you can't, with an LID, pay for benefit that your participants are not receiving. So we were very careful that your portion of the project only went to permit and to repair and replacement. And that amount was agreed upon and fixed by the HARSB board
I think,
when we began the project.
But I think that's a very good argument in the fact that, but the fact of the matter is that the permit and the permit issue all went to the total capacity of the plant at that time.
No, it only went to the portion that was allocable to the district because that's all we can do with the LID. We have extremely complicated records that track that.
Okay, I need to see those because I don't see them now.
I've got binder after binder.
Mhm.
The spreadsheet I showed, and you gotta realize that the current project we're in is a 10-year project. So you can't split phase 1 from phase 2. It has to be considered as a 10-year project. Because the way the agreement was written is that the district was put in first, the city was put in second, and then HARSB was put in last. And the county, as the end of each phase went, they did a true-up with what portion was theirs. So HARSB has put in more at this back side than we did at the very initial set of it. But in a $24 million project, the percentage that went to the district, sorry, I didn't.
Nope, you put the other one back up so that you're in again. There you go, you're all good.
Okay, sorry.
I couldn't hear that last comment.
That's okay. So out of a 10-year project for $24 million, the only amount that went to the district is the $6 million that they originally put in. Yes, it was during in phase 1, but that was so that they could close their LID so that LID did not stay open for 10 years. So out of a $24 million project, they basically have 1/4 of it. And as it sits right now, they have a refund coming.
Okay, all I'm doing is bringing up the issue that the capital investment that the district has put into this is based on a 2 million gallon plant. And you can parse it out back and forth, but I don't have all those numbers, obviously, but what I'm saying is that I like the idea of the district being a wholesale user with some insider influence.
Okay, that makes sense to me and I understand it. I just wanted to be clear that we were very cautious about allocating the project in accordance with what would benefit the district only, as we're required to do by the LID law. So that expansion was not paid for by the district. We did have to pick a date where we allocated what the portion that went to the district was. And I will say, in addition, the district got a huge benefit by being able to close the LID early and not have to pay all that interim interest and get the interest rates that we got in 2013 as compared to the interest rate that the city got. So, there was a huge benefit in the district's participation, and we were extremely cautious to make sure that participation exactly matched the benefit to the district. So I just want to be clear about that.
Understand, and it's either good timing or good management.
Any other questions for our gentleman? Yeah. Jeff?
Yes, I have a question. That goes to the land. As I understand it, roughly half of the land is being used for land app and the rest is sitting or being leased out or whatever. Belongs to the HARSB at this point, although the district purchased a good deal of that land and then sold it for ERs, as I understand it. I just find a 10-year sunset on if that land were to be sold rather arbitrary. I've lived in the Northwest most of my life and seen some land go from $2 to $100,000 an acre, literally. And that's just in my lifetime. I've never seen it do anything but go up. So my concern is recovering that cost and that investment that was made years ago if that land is used for any other purpose. As long as it's used for land app as they expand, I guess I wouldn't have a big issue with it. So I'm like, someone else on our board might, I wouldn't. But I do have the issue if that land.
Would there be a problem for the district representatives if the land were to be sold and the proceeds used to improve the digesters? Or the intake? Or the biosolids processing?
Yes, I would, given, in theory, they could sell half that land and do an entire upgrade of that plant. You said you're not an appraiser, but a good friend of mine, Sandy Emerson, is an appraiser. Land on the Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer goes from between 50,000 an acre, and that's rock bottom. That was the 1,500 acres just east of Kalispell that was sold, to near completely utility, completely in near Post Falls at $1 million an acre for a couple acres. There's your range right there. It's huge. So we're talking about a considerable amount of money here. Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. I'm just asking about the effect of
Let him finish, Jeff. Go ahead, Gordon.
I'm asking about the effect of dedicating it to the treatment plant improvements.
And I would like to address that, Barb Neal. I definitely have an issue with that.
Do you have a microphone?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I can hear her.
Okay. I definitely have an issue with the idea of the property being sold and being put back in the treatment plant. I strongly believe that at the time that any of the property is sold, that a percentage should come back to the district, period.
So Ken, I have a question for you to follow that up. Would there ever be a time where the plant would not use that property for land application?
No, it's a board decision long-term, but in the discussions that I have with Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls, we are all looking eventually to be out of the river. And that land application site is key to that activity happening because of regulatory changes that causes more grief for us to stay in the river. Having that property provides us a management decision by the board to come out of the river and not deal with the regulatory stuff.
I have no problem with that at all. My problem is if and when it's ever sold, I just don't see a 10-year sunset on that.
Sure, and we can, that's all negotiable in the agreements. I think he just had a discussion point in there for that item. Any more questions?
I wanted to ask one more question, Leslie.
Yeah.
Did you look at, because we had some discussion amongst the attorneys about making a determination if the land actually is surplus, and it seemed like there were some feelings from some of the entities that it potentially was surplus at this point. I mean, I know Ken does not feel it's surplus. Did you do any analysis related to that, or do you have any thoughts related to that based on your experience?
And I guess it might be helpful to provide how many acres are there, how many acres are actively used for land applications, and how many are just there. I think that there are a couple hundred of acres that aren't in use and haven't ever been in use. And so, what is your definition of surplus capacity as well? Because one of the things that I know that the district board is concerned about is that land, if the city is going to be responsible for 90% of expansion going forward, and we just leave that land there, and that land is utilized to pay for city expansion, then as to district users who have some equitable interest in that surplus land, they're being deprived of 90% of its value over time. But I think that dovetails in with Danielle's question, so go ahead.
Okay. Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Was that directed at me? Okay, can you restate the question? Is that okay?
Sorry, Danielle.
No problem. I just was asking if you had done any analysis on whether the land was surplus or if that's something that could be done, because I feel like there's a difference in opinion on whether the land is currently surplus, and how, if not how that determination could be kind of made for everyone.
I haven't done any independent analysis on that question, and I'm not an engineer and I would not pretend to be competent to do my own analysis of that question. But taking a step back, looking at the situation, it sounds like, if I heard correctly, that the plant manager is saying that the plant manager under current ownership, that where you all are co-owners, is saying that the general direction of the regulatory pressure is toward getting out of the river, and we're going to need that land. And that, that's under current ownership. And so I'm inclined to take that as the presumption.
So what is the definition of surplus land? And the fact that it might be needed in the future for future growth doesn't necessarily mean, if it's not needed now, why isn't that surplus? And I guess, do you have a definition of what surplus assets are?
Would a manager say, we don't need this anymore, let's sell it? And if your current manager, under current ownership structure, is saying, we still need to have it, because of the direction that the regulatory pressures are going, then I think it's a remote possibility. I can't say it's a zero possibility, but it's a remote possibility that it might be declared surplus in the future. But the surplus is a declaration made by whoever the manager is about the prospects for it being ever needed.
So your explanation focuses on what is primarily a benefit to the city that's going to be expanding. But if the district departs from ownership and membership in HARSB, and that land is not needed by the district and not reasonably anticipated to be needed by the district really ever, there's a little bit of a difference, because as far as from the district's perspective, I think that they could call that surplus. From the city's perspective, I think that they would say, yeah, at some point in the future, we might want to use that land.
Mike, I think the distinction is why Ken said he might use the land in the future. It's not for expansion, it's for getting out of the river. It's in the event that the permit requirements get so stringent that the cost to upgrade the plant and meet those requirements doesn't make sense, and that there's a better solution for everyone, not for expansion, to go do more land application. I think that's the reason, if I'm not wrong, Ken, that the land makes sense, not because there'd be some in the river and we put the expansion on the land.
Yeah, can I add to that? Bear in mind, you're going to be ratepayers. Whatever cost HARSB has in the future, you're going to end up paying a share of. And I think looking ahead, and the question of surplus or not surplus is a question for the plant as a whole. And it's just to isolate this particular type of asset and say, well, we bought this back at this point in time, and that doesn't make as much sense to me when we're talking about your rights to an entire operation, your right to have parity status as original investors in a going concern, a business that exists and provides a good service right now, and that you can foresee will have to keep the regulators happy in the future by getting out of the river. I see it as a whole entity more than a piecemeal divided by types of assets. That's how it looks to me.
A couple of points that I think could address that, in an agreement. I mean, if you're concerned with the timing, perhaps we add, to the timing. In the Rathdrum Post Falls agreement, there is something analogous. It's not exact, but it mentions not using, it mentions establishing a capital replacement fund. And so you could designate in an agreement that if the property is sold, it goes into some kind of fund that is designated only to be used for whatever's decided, and you could carve off, like we've done in the other projects, that it's not used for expansion of the system, because that would be borne by capitalization fees or the city. And so you could write that into an agreement, so your concern about it, and I was trying to understand where you were concerned with the expansion, and I think that was clarified, but you could carve that off in the agreement, that this capital fund is established that's used for replacing, fixing, upgrading the plant. And so from what I could tell from what Steph gave us, it was approximately almost a 50-50 purchase on the land. And we were both given back cap fee credits for that. And so if there were determined it was surplus property and you decided to take that, I mean, the same would end up on the city's side, that money could be then used for our circulation or whatever. And so that money then, those monies would not be dedicated towards reducing the rates for all of the citizens. And so I think that's what we were looking at, is the conditions in an agreement can be that that the fees that are paid, similar to what's in that agreement, that they are basically on par, that we're not charging you guys more than what the rates are. And so doing that, there's an interest on all sides to keep those rates low. And we can do that by, if the property were determined to be surplus, put it into, say, a capitalization fund to be used for certain things, which could all be done in an agreement. It seems to make more sense to me than to say we're just going to take that out and do something else with it.
Can I ask a clarifying question so I understand what you're suggesting? Were you thinking that it might make sense to dedicate any future proceeds, if there were ever to be any future proceeds, over whatever length of time, to dedicate those not just to improvements to the plant, but to non-expansion improvements to the plant?
That's a possibility.
Is that what you're?
Yeah, that's
your idea? Okay, then let me give you a scenario, and that could be done. You can write all kinds of provisions into an agreement. If you were to do that, let's say you've got a big project coming up, and most projects are a mixture of expansion. Expansion projects aren't just to expand; they also replace a bunch of stuff that was old. So let's say 40% of your project is R&R, replacement and rehabilitation, and 60% is to provide new expansion, new capacity. And so you have this pot of money that's, between then and now. Let's say we're 20 years in the future, and you've decided that you don't need all that land in spite of the fact that you expect to expand, and the regulators have gone soft on us, and we've just decided, okay, we can sell it. And we've got a pot of money that you can't use for 60% of your big capital project, but you can use it for 40%. It either would completely offset the 40%, in which case it's not a meaningful provision, which is, okay, it doesn't do any harm. Or else you're holding some of that money aside that can't be used for the 60%, which means that the rates would have to go up even higher. Bear in mind, with parity rates, insiders and outsiders pay the same. So if rates have to go up, someone's got to pay those bills. And so you can do that. You can create all kinds of restrictions in some future potential revenue stream. But the thing I'm questioning is whether that really is in your interest.
When you say rates, are you talking about fees?
I'm saying the thing that your customers pay to be able to discharge wastewater.
Are you talking about fees, taxes, capitalization fees, O&M fees?
Ongoing rates. Ongoing rates.
The O&M fees.
O&M, yeah.
O&M fees. So you're talking about using O&M fees to pay for expansion.
There has to be some backstop revenue source.
Well, is that what you're talking about, though?
That's what I'm assuming that yeah, customers pay for their sewage to be collected by the wholesale entity, which then pays the provider, wholesale provider.
So yeah, I think that's something that maybe legal counsel needs to look into to make sure that that would be appropriate.
I think what I would suggest is that there's another way to look at that land. And as Ken mentioned, you know, the regulatory requirements for us and cooperation with Post Falls and Rathdrum, getting it out of the river is a really good solution to those concerns. So since land is becoming an issue, is there any way to, in an agreement, should there be one, that land should be held in perpetuity by the plant? And there's a lot of advantages to that. Ken is going to be gone pretty soon. He's looking forward to that kind of treatment. You're not going to be there forever, Ken. And under the new circumstances, his replacement may not necessarily be someone that has room to make decisions that Ken has had. I think for our generation, it's not going to make a difference. But for future generations, having one, open space on the prairie, and two, that land so that we can spread that water, our water on that land may be the best solution.
So
I'm just tossing it out.
Right, so that's great. So that's part of the agreements that the entities can come to. So I want to make sure that if we have any other questions for Gordon, that they relate to his document that he gave. So any other questions, because we can easily as entities address each issue one by one and in the agreement. So Jeff?
I have one clarification. As I read the report, I remembered the parity or insider parity being also held to 10 years. And maybe I looked at a draft report, but that seems to be a different story today. Now, did I get?
Yeah, no, that would not.
No. In fact, that's really valuable. But my reason for my suggested 10-year limit is because it's not a highly meaningful provision anyway. It's something that probably would not come up. Even if it does come up, dedicating it is something the city would probably do anyway. So I think, why bother to create these compliance requirements going out to the future generations? That's way different from the parity rights. That is meaningful. And my strong advice for the district and the airport is that your interests are well served by having that guarantee that your people won't be paying any more in future rates than city people. And to the degree that you want to carve out certain parts of the transaction or certain types of assets, that weakens the parity right. And I think the parity right is a valuable thing for your customers. And that is in perpetuity.
Yes, thank you, Gordon. Any other questions for Gordon specifically? Okay, so we've been at this an hour, so we can take a 5-minute break if you like, or what else we have left is just talking about each entity's areas of questions, concerns that need to be addressed. I think we got through a lot of that with Gordon. So I would ask, are we in favor of a break and coming back to those items, or do we want to have a break and go into our public entities meetings? our separate entity meetings. Thoughts?
I have just a couple questions.
Can you? Okay.
Matt Roller from City of Hayden. I have just one question for the district to address. That if I'm the only one, then maybe I can ask a question and we can move on to the separate meetings.
Sure. Do you think we need Gordon for this, or?
I've got one quick question for Gordon.
Okay. Yes.
It's off.
Go ahead and.
Gordon, a quick question. If we were to determine that the property was surplus and only that part of it, have you seen in your examples where they have carved off a specific asset and disposed of that asset without looking at all the liabilities and other issues of the organization? Or would that be an issue?
Would you restate the question? Have I seen another example where what?
Where if by carving off, carving off just one asset of the organization, so carving off and saying we're going to take the property and sell that, are there examples of taking one asset such as the property and disposing of that without looking at the bigger picture of all the liabilities and other issues associated with that organization or that entity?
I have not seen examples of even treating one class of assets different from another class of assets, much less doing so in the absence of the consideration of future liabilities. The question of future liabilities is the reason you might not sell the land. That's the constraint on ever generating any proceeds. It's because the regulators are trying to get you out of the river. That's the liability that all of you are going to be facing, because all of you are going to have to pay the rates the next time you need a capital upgrade. So that pushes against ever selling the land. But I have not come across a situation where even a particular class of assets was treated differently.
Maybe to clarify.
Does that answer your question?
To clarify that, I think maybe what Brett is asking is is there a good reason why the city, if it so chose, to treat the land differently and compensate the district as in the event of a sale during some time period or not, or put it in a special fund like we were talking about? Is there any downside to that other than obviously the city still has to run the plant and you have the...
Yeah. The only, I don't see a very high downside because I think it's what the city would do anyways, because I think the process likelihood is very remote. But anytime you restrict future revenues, that creates less flexibility for the managing entity. And you have to take that into concern. Having a separate fund, if it were to come to that, has some administrative requirements to go with it on the accounting side. I don't think they would necessarily be a deal breaker. If there were reasons to do this, and I mentioned before that this is largely it strikes me as a non-economic kind of deal. And if you decide to do it, it would be because for the sake of streamlined management or control over future growth or clear accountability or those kinds of reasons having to do with how the place is managed and how you get money to do capital improvements. And so there is a burden placed on the managing entity. And restrictions cut into that burden a little bit. But I don't think the limitations created by some future restriction on a hypothetical, transaction would be enough, should be enough to derail the entire effort. I think the reasons for doing this would make sense in spite of some kind of dedicated fund. Does that address the question?
Yeah, Gordon, Jim Coleman here, and I guess I have to put this in my own perspective, is that the land issue and and the asset issue really pales when you consider the fact that this district is currently paying about $700,000 a year to treat our waste to HARSB, and it's not going to get any less expensive. And your parity issue becomes very important when you start looking at $20 or $30 million over the next 20 years of rates. And so I would like your opinion on what constitutes parity. I mean, when you say parity, is it on an ER basis, or are we treated as a wholesale user on a cost of service analysis?
That's a very good question, and I'll tell you what I would recommend, how you think about it. I'd suggest that you think about it in terms of your customers. What if the district went away and your people, your property owners, were just directly connected to the city? They still should not have to pay a nickel more than an equivalent property owner inside the city. That's what I mean by parity. It's the end customer. Regardless of whether there's an intermediary, an organization that collects, that provides a collection system and collects their bills and sends one big check to the city. I think the right that you've earned by being initial investors should accrue to your constituents, your property owners.
Well,
and I wouldn't get too wrapped up in the organization.
Yeah, and I think that's true, but in all agreements that I've looked at where districts send wastewater to cities, whether it's Rathdrum or West Boise or City of Eagle, they are paying for the operation and maintenance as a wholesale user, and on parity, because then the user is no different than Lamb Western in Twin Falls, Idaho, where they send equivalent of 150,000 population to the Twin Falls treatment plant. They still pay. If you look at that on a population basis, their rates are quite a bit less than, because on a cost of service analysis, it's easier to treat. I mean, if there's a certain amount of treatment efficiency that they get because of the fact that they've already paid for the treatment. We can get into that. That was in my former life, and I kind of want to forget that. But anyway, that's a. I mean, so I guess what part of this agreement is that I think we need to see how we define parity. Is it defined like the city of Rathdrum and Post Falls, or is it defined on an ER basis, which I can tell you right now that the ER rate, flow rate, does not at all represent what is actually an equivalent residential user.
Well, I don't know the details of your current rate structure, so I can't tell you what would be an increase or decrease.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, and there are, the reason it's such a good question that you raise is because there are different ways to define it, particularly when you have an intermediary organization. When you have a wholesale entity collecting the bills, paying for the pipes, the collection pipes, and then writing one big check to the treatment provider. But I think And so the question of how you define parity is not an automatic easy one. But I would, and as you look ahead toward negotiating an agreement separating the roles from and shifting from a co-owner to a wholesale customer, I would advise you to think about the end customer's costs and get some kind of way of defining it that you can take to your constituents and say, you're not going to be paying any more than inside city people, because that creates the incentives. What you want is incentives for the city to play it straight 20 years from now. If you define it in ways that, well, we're going to take 27% of our O&M cost and add a 1.5 overhead markup and blah, 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 and who knows how it will turn out. If you do that type of agreement, and I've certainly seen plenty of those, then it weakens your ability to tell your constituents that they're not going to be paying more and they're not going to be paying less. They're just going to be paying the same. And I think the closer you can define it, especially for single family, my understanding is that the district's population is largely single family. If you can create some kind of direct comparison between what your single family people pay for treatment and what city people pay for treatment, and find a way to define that, separate the city's collection costs from their treatment costs, then that will be in your interest, the interest of your population, because it points the incentives in the right direction. 20, 30 years from now.
I think there's no question that this board in its current makeup is looking after the ratepayer and to a certain extent the taxpayers, because like I say, we're a little different in the city. We actually collect taxes for our district for administrative costs. So I think that we can, if we can, at least come to a starting point as to where the rates start. I mean, where the costs start and where they end, then we can probably come up. I think once we get a rate, then we can decide what we're going to charge our constituents.
As long as there's an intermediary organization, then of course you have to do that.
Yeah.
So attempting to move our agenda forward this morning, I know, Matt, you had one question you wanted to pose to the group. Our next item on our agenda is our individual breakout sessions, seeing how it doesn't appear there's anyone from the public here to comment.
I think there's a couple people on the Zoom call.
Okay.
So I'm going to call for public comment on Zoom. Is there anybody from the public that would like to make a comment at this time? Unmute yourself. Okay, I'm not hearing anything in the chat box, Jonathan. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Duncan. So I know Matt's got a question. Maybe if we just toss those questions out to the group real quick so that the group can ponder them. We'll go ahead and take our break, and then after our break, we'll roll right into our individual group sessions so that the groups can have an opportunity to chat about whatever questions are posed at this point. So, Matt, you want to start us off real quick? And
Thank you. Was there?
Does Gordon need to be on for this question?
Is your question for Gordon? Okay, so we can excuse Gordon.
so, Gordon, if you could hear that, it sounds like you were excused otherwise.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My question is for the district, and I heard Mr. Coleman say that the cap fees that would be collected by the district, there was a concern about it paying for future expansion, because you're growing, you're either not growing, you're not growing very much. So I understand why that's a concern, because the city is growing, and we should bear the cost of that growth. So my question is this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard in previous HARBS meetings that you have pre-sold your cap fees. Those are already been collected for properties that have not connected to the sewer system. So if there's not very many cap fees either to be sold or you don't have any to sell, why would that be a concern about cap fees being paid for future expansion?
Jim, is that a question you want to chat with as part of your group and then come back and readdress as a whole? Okay,
That'll
perfect.
work.
So I'll let the district take that question back to their group with them. Any other questions to pose to the group as a whole at this point?
I just have one comment.
Go ahead, Jim.
Believe it or not, this is the second attempt at dissolution of the HARBS. The first one was back in 2006, and I got to tell you that the issues haven't changed in 17 years. It's just hard. It's hard to imagine that. I don't know what scuttled the 2006 agreement. I suspect it's because there was, they were looking down the barrel of a major improvement to the treatment plant, and nobody could agree who was going to pay for it and how it was going to get paid for. So, but the fact of the matter is that it's, like I say, the discussion is interesting because it's deja vu all over again.
All right, well, hearing, go ahead, Barb.
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment. At one point, someone said this isn't a divorce. In reality, it is. It is a divorce. And if a couple starts off in their marriage and they buy a house for $20,000 back 40 years ago, and that house increases in value and is now worth $1 million, which my actual childhood home is that scenario, is it fair to just say, okay, you can have it all? We're fine with that. That's the question I have, is because I'm hard pressed to go back to our ratepayers and say, we gave it all. What did we get? Okay, well, we got a consistent rate. I don't know that that's good enough. We were there in the beginning, and we invested in the treatment plant. We invested in the land. So this is a divorce.
So I look at it more like a kid and parent. So the parent raised the kids, and now the kids are off on their own, and the parent is being a customer now, and the kids are running the plant, like, providing all the service for the kids. So I don't look at it as, yeah, I'm just saying.
Together as a couple. That's why I look at it like a marriage and a
Okay.
divorce.
All right.
All right, well, Leslie, before we break, if you just want to give some direction, I know we've got some chairs set out where you would like each of the groups. I would suggest that everyone take their 5-minute break, reconvene within your group, and then when your group is done, come sit back together at the full table, and then that will indicate to the other groups that you're done, and that'll kind of prompt us to move back toward the next item agenda.
So I actually have the district staying at the tables. If
Okay.
they want to push their chairs back and kind of huddle up, that's fine. Hayden going back there, and then we're going to go up in this corner here for the counting.
Perfect, thanks, Leslie.
A time frame? It might take, I think everybody will be aware of what's happening.
Well, and Ben actually goes around and checks after 15 minutes.
Okay.
So.
I'll do my best, Mike.
To fire back up here. Hopefully everything went well in your entities, and I'm going to pass it back over to Ben and see where he takes us.
Perfect. Thank you, Leslie. So the group's having had an opportunity to discuss amongst yourselves some of the issues that have been brought up this morning. What I really would hope for us to be able to do is to go back around the table for each of the groups to share a summary of what your entity discussed, your takeaways from this morning's conversation, and any additional questions that you may have for the other entity. I'd like for the group to hear one entity in its entirety, and then we'll shift the microphone over to the next group and then to the final group. And if we need to make a second round in like format to follow up, I'm happy to do that. But hopefully that will keep the microphone kind of centralized in one location until each entity's had an opportunity to share all of their thoughts and see where that gets us in the conversation. So with that said, I'll just start on my left because it seems to be our logical starting point here with the district. And Jim, I don't know if you want to take the reins on behalf of the district or share the mic around, but I'll defer to the entity here first.
Well, I think I'm going to pass this off to Michael just because he's taken copious notes and may be able to. And I'll jump in if I don't think he got it quite right.
Copious notes are 7. My copious notes are 7 bullet points. So first of all, I know that there was some desire and maybe some pressure to make this move quickly, maybe as quickly as possible, but the district needs time to kind of work through this and analyze it. The district is going to be seeking a consultant. Exactly what the scope of that consultation is going to be is we still need to kind of figure that out. The land one of the other things is regarding the idea that there may be a land surplus. We think that there is. There should be some percentage of the land that's owned that is not needed now. And I think that value, the district would like to do something to capture and to protect that value, that equity that it has in that particular asset. The idea of sunsetting rights of the district to that land or to sitting at the table, but especially the land, over this idea that there's an administrative burden involved with that doesn't make really any sense to the district given the millions of dollars in value of that land, which is an appreciating asset. One thing that we need to talk through as well is in terms of cost allocation, whether that's on an ER basis versus a flow percentage basis. I guess that's the question or the issue. The district right now is only okay with a cost of service analysis that's based on a flow and load basis, and that should serve as the basis for calculating its payment obligations. If land is sold and used for expansion, the district would be interested in getting a percentage of whatever the surplus percentage is determined to be paid out to the district to use for its collector system or whatever. And regarding the analysis to determine that percentage, there's going to be a lot of assumptions for arriving at that percentage, and I think that some of them are objective, some of them are subjective, but that's something that's going to be the topic of future discussions and is probably open to debate. And the district is willing to, work in good faith to talk through that in hopes that the other member entities are as well. One concern of the district is that there's going to be an engineering analysis in the future where the ER or wastewater unit will be adjusted down in terms of gallons per day. And the district feels that it should receive some adjustment percentage based on what our current capacity or ownership percentage is now. And the idea there is that, you understand the idea. And one of the things that did make sense, and we've talked about this before, but I think that Brett explained it pretty well, is that, establishing a capital replacement fund and ensuring that the district money isn't used for expansion, like apparently the RAFTRM agreement, I believe you said, that's something that I think would help to protect the district in terms of protecting its equity and making sure that it's treated fairly as if it were to give up, membership, quote unquote, ownership rights in the treatment plant. And so dedicating proceeds from district funds to non-expansion improvements is something that the district would be interested in. And we talked about this divorce analysis, and I think that it's pretty apt. And this is just kind of the district's thinking, that right now there's extra land, there's extra capacity, and nobody really needs it right now at this moment. It's needed potentially in the future. And so if we talk about the divorce analysis, and I shared this with the attorneys and management at HARSB, but just because one spouse plans to grow their family in the future doesn't necessarily mean that the other spouse two, should give it up its share of the value it contributed to the house in retirement for spouse one's benefit. The district isn't planning on growing. It's pretty much built out. And so the district is not interested in necessarily donating all the value that it's put into the plant to benefit future growth for the city, and just really wants to ensure that the city is going to be paying for that growth, and its constituents and ratepayers aren't paying for that. So no surprises there, I don't think, regarding anything that we said, but I don't have anything else. I've gone through my bullet points if anybody has any color or flavor to add. Okay.
Perfect. I'll move next to the city.
Okay. Just a lot to digest with what you just said. I wrote all that down. I think to start off with, from the city's perspective, if you look at just where we're going with this historically, the county wants out of it, that reducing this government footprint down to one entity to run this makes sense for various reasons. One, we talk about what the capacity is there. There really isn't a lot of capacity left from what we've been given. 1,100 cars isn't a long time. If that's 5 years in this type of putting things together, that's not a lot of time. And so we are worried about being able to have additional capacity at the plant. I do think that there are ways through the concerns, or we talked about putting a contract together to try to still address the concerns. You brought up some things that could derail that, I think, perhaps on the property, but I think we could still find a way to do it. And our primary discussion there was trying to understand where the district was. And I think with your comments, you explained some of those. Because as you were talking earlier, we heard two concerns. One, with the property and what happens with the property. And then Jim also had some general concerns about the remaining capacity. So from our perspective, we think it would be short-sighted to sell the property at this point. We don't know what the future holds as far as what's going to happen in the river. I mean, just recently we started talking about PFAS and those kind of things that I don't understand, that we can't even measure. We don't know what's going to happen with that, and I think it would be from our perspective, surplusing any of the property anytime in the future is not smart and not a smart idea. But we understand that you have a concern about that as an asset. So with that, we wanted to hear from you, and so these were more questions on the property side of things, if you are willing to allow and come up with the contract where the property would stay with the entity, and we could extend the timeout to, if it's 20 years or whatever, at some point, I don't know, that the value of that stays with and goes in the capital side of things if it were sold. If you're willing to do that and carve off and say that that can't be used for expansion of the system, so that would protect those concerns, I think moving forward with an agreement is easier. If your answer is no, we want we don't want to include that into a capital fund, we want to be paid for that, that's a bigger question or issue. There needs to be more analysis, because when you think about just carving off an asset from a system, you've got to look at the liabilities. The city would be taking on liabilities with this system. Known liabilities such as H3, we had the airport here, we know that has to move, and that's going to be basically a liability of the system that will have to come over. We don't know what the liabilities are going to be with PFAS and other things. There could be some major legal issues that you guys would then be pulling yourself out of. So there's no, you don't think so? Okay. But anyways, with the system comes liabilities and future replacement, or all of that, the system that the city would be, responsible for. And so I think our position was keeping the assets with it, but protecting what your concerns are so that the money's only used to keep the rates low, was where our position was. So if you're okay keeping it there, it makes sense to continue to move forward with an agreement. Not saying that we can't. We may have to wait for your analysis. But if it is the other way, I think we may need to hire a consultant to look at the broader picture. Or maybe there's another way. But I don't see the board, I don't know where the county is, as far as declaring it surplus. But we don't, from our end, we don't see declaring it surplus property now. So we're dealing with a future issue. So the second part was Jim's area. I guess wanting to know, is the property the only issue, or do we have to also do analysis on the remaining capacity, is what you brought up. I think from the discussions we've had before, the city has been paying for the last 15 years for any actual expansion of the system. It's coming from the cap fees that have been paid by the city, maybe just a few minor ones from the county. And so those cap fees have been coming from HARSB on the cap fee side and from the city side to expand the system, not from the district. And so I think, I could be wrong on this, and maybe Danielle would know, but if we look at really what capacity there, I don't think there's a remaining capacity that the district would be entitled to. Could be wrong. So.
If I might add a question to the question, Stephanie.
So our question kind of is what does the district want as far as assets, or are you asking for a payment, or
no?
We still didn't understand where you were.
We're just asking for a limit of what, if the city ever declares it surplus, and if they decide to sell it, we're just asking for a provision in the agreement as to what it can be used for, because we don't want the city to say, well, we got 200 acres out here that's surplus, let's sell it for $20 million and put it in general fund.
Yeah.
Or let's back up just a little, not put it in the general fund, but upgrade it to 4 million gallons a day. And we'll use that money to do that. That is upgrading the capacity of the plant is no benefit to the district.
Yep, correct. And that's why I think if that's where you're at,
That's where we're at.
I think that could be written into an agreement.
And the other part of it is that when you say that, you know, you're gonna have to make improvements and the district needs to be, if improvements have to be made to meet a regulatory or an operational requirement, that goes into that has to go in and paid for by rates. It's a capital expenditure, not for expansion, but for operation, maintenance, and continuing use of the treatment plant for what's intended to. That has to go in the rates, and so obviously the district would pay, the city would probably upfront the cost, but then just like or you could ask us to pass a revenue bond and buy it up front. I mean, that's another option, but I don't think that'll happen. So the city's gonna have to pay for those things up front, either through funded depreciation or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But that goes into the rate base. It's just like when Avista upgrades a electrical system, that goes into the rate base and the ratepayers pay for it.
So the city's not assuming the risk as much as the administrative burden, which then all of the ratepayers are gonna have to pay if any of those things happen.
Okay. Well, what I just heard, to me, that sounds like that could be handled in an agreement.
But I think what Michael said is that, we need, and what Gordon said is that there's a parity there. And, I mean, your comment about there's only 1,100 ERs left in the capacity of the plant. Brett, we all know that's not true.
I know that's frustrating to say, but that's what we can sell.
Let me throw out some numbers. So at 172.5, the treatment plant has 11,600 ERs capacity. If at 125 gallons per day, which is really what the treatment plant is seeing per ER.
No.
Huh?
No.
Nope.
The plant, just so everybody's on the same page, has certain size tanks that handle a certain amount of capacity. The entities still have days where you are going beyond what the plant has capacity for.
Peak
Rain
flow,
on snow,
peak
flows.
flow.
We still have to have that go through the plant. I am not gonna support lowering it below 172.5 because you all are still exceeding that amount at certain times of the year. And I have to get it through the plant and meet permit requirements.
Well,
So you guys
we'll agree to disagree on that.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that, when the analysis was done 3 or 4 years ago by JUB, it was 122.5 was the average capacity for an ER. At 125 gallons per day, there's 16,000 ERs available in that treatment plant. Permit is flow-based. Yeah, but the max annual capacity is based on loads and flow. Has nothing to do with how many people are flushing their toilet.
That's correct, but I don't think it's 125, Jim, but I will concede that it's probably not 172.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, Ken, is that we're perfectly able as a district to go ahead and put our own equalization in and so you don't ever see it.
Well, that's a different world out there. And then you could look at lowering it. But right now, the plant has to take all the water that you all send us. And the 172.5 is where we're at. So that on the days when we have a rain on snow event or a huge rainstorm or something, I don't have it overflowing the tanks onto the ground and DEQ is getting mad at me.
So you don't have a peak capacity, peak hour capacity, peak day capacity, maximum day capacity.
We do.
Have we ever exceeded that?
This peak day, yeah, we have.
We've exceeded the peak day capacity of the treatment plant.
Last December.
You sent out a report this last year on it. I remember it.
Yeah.
So just to understand this then, because it's always been frustrating. We're sitting in the meetings and the plant, I mean, I've seen it handle up to 3 million. I mean, but that's using the equalization tank. But we're rated at 2 million and we're using on average in the summer months, 1.1 in usage. But we're rated for 2 million, but we have 11. We're told every time, the next one, we have 1,100 ERs left that we can sell. So is the issue that if the city takes over, we no longer have the JPA, which restricts us to those numbers, that we then would be able to reallocate the total capacity and have more ERs based on just doing that? Or I'm missing something because I go to those meetings and you tell me we have 1,100 more to sell, and that's all we have. And you're telling me we have a lot more.
Well,
The issue is under construction agreement, we can't reallocate until the project is complete.
yeah, and here's how you do it, Brad. So you have different rates for us as a district, as a wholesale user. We have the average daily flow, we have the peak hour flow, we have the peak day flow. And we get charged based on what that costs to operate. And if we make the decision that we're tired of paying this peak flow rate of 10,000 gallons a gallon or $10,000 a gallon, we're going to go out and build some equalization ourselves.
So that's a slightly different issue. I mean, we build differently, but
But
I guess my
but
question
the treatment
is,
plant is designed for an average daily flow of 2 million gallons. A peak daily flow of what? 3.5?
Someplace in that neighborhood, I'd have to look at the document.
I'm sorry this question goes off a little bit, but if we
But it's
do this,
important.
would
It's
DEQ
important.
allow us based on the peak flows? Because I thought the peak flows determined how much we could.
No.
It's the final numbers coming out the end of the pipe into the river.
And it could be loaded.
It's loaded, yes.
Probably not.
It's loaded.
So when we finish phase 2, and that portion of the financial agreement is done, what's our capacity to sell going to be?
It's still 2 MGD because we have issues that have to be resolved in the eyes of DEQ. We have to look at the aeration capacity of the oxidation ditches, and we have to look at the pumping capacity of H3, getting the water down the pipe and not flooding out the airport. Those are the 2 issues that are not still on the list to get us to 2.4.
So we don't know.
And both of them can be solved.
Oh, absolutely. It's all money. It's easy.
So the cost to go from 1.8 to 2 was 30 million?
It was 14 some million for the first phase, 24 million for the second phase, so what, 38? But that was,
And
most
to
of
go
it
from-
was regulatory and replacement, not capacity.
So to go from 2 to 2.4, I know you can't just do that, but there's just there's a number of limiting factors at the plant, but there's additional capacity built into the existing infrastructure. So some things would need to be improved, and so
At 137, it's probably.
You're right. Because we built a lot of the components of the project at the scale. I think that the distinction is that that was paid for by the
Can't exceed if we do.
that capacity was paid for by the and paid for by the cars. And so the fact that they put out said let's call it 10 to make it 2.4, the district's not entitled to that because they didn't pay for that.
And nor do we want it.
Because you didn't pay for it. So
We don't want it.
because the upgrades, the
Danielle, we don't want it. And so we're not gonna pay, if we don't want it,
I thought what
we're not gonna pay for it.
what the concern was that you're not getting the value for if we convert for the extra capacity that's coming.
No.
If that's not a concern, we don't need to, we don't need to
Yeah,
talk
not a
about that any
concern.
further.
We-
So,
One of these bullet points.
yeah, I was just,
Let's rein it in here real quick, just to make sure everyone has an opportunity to have a clear chance to speak. We're still with the city. The city raised some concerns. Obviously, Jim, you responded. Danielle's given some additional input. Let's circle back to the city. And Brett, let's let you finish up your points from your entities discussions.
I would say that was a helpful clarification. I think good communication. I come back to, if that's not an issue, what I heard is that I think working through an agreement, that is still a possibility that we could work on. I mean, we talked about maybe the city working on a draft that we could give to the district that you then could go through and mark up and see, and the county would as well. I know you haven't spoken yet. That's pretty much, I think the discussion we had was trying to get those couple questions answered, because we felt like the rest of the items could be addressed in agreement. You brought up in yours, the issue of how to do the rate, and you wanted the flow and load basis. That analysis with FCS, I mean, we have an approved contract, and if we get to the point where we feel like the property issue is resolved, we can the council just needs to approve FCS to move on, and that can be consideration of looking at those rates, and that's important information as part of this.
Michael mentioned that the board, the district board has authorized us to go out and look for consultants that can do an analysis on cost of service and other issues related to the dissolution for the district. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with FCS. It's just that they're your FCS is it's a client who's paying for it, so to speak. And so there's some reluctance on the board to accept exactly that. Everything they say is gospel. So we're gonna, and one of the things that I would like to do is that I would really like HARSB, whether it's done by our consultant or their consultant or whoever the case may be, I would really like to do a true, realistic engineering, scientific capacity analysis on that treatment plant. I think that would help everybody. Not saying that Ken is not correct, but and he may be, but I really think that a true and get it done by somebody independent of the whole thing, whether it's Jacobs or Keller or HMH or Tooth and Orton. They've got there's a whole bunch of firms that are very well qualified to do that.
Okay, I think the comment was after we finish or close out the loan, so that we can do that. But I think that's something we could look at. But I thought I would just mention, as far as the city, I think I've touched on the points that we wanted to make. So
Perfect. Thanks, Brett. Danielle, did you have something to share as far as that timeline's concerned?
Yeah, I mean, Brett is correct. So under the construction agreement, we can't do a reallocation until we close the bond, which, I mean, I think we're hoping to do by the end of the year, but that's the timing for that. And then you could certainly do that review.
Anything else from any other representatives of the city?
If I might bring one thing up, Jim, I'm concerned that the first meeting that we had, we mentioned doing a rate study, and the district said, well, that all depends on who you want to hire, because we don't know if we'll go with that or not. And Brett said, we'll go with FCS, and the board said, oh, well, they're fine.
now are you suggesting that they're not fine and that you want to have another independent study?
I think, Mayor, what we said is that FCS would be just fine, but we want to have the ability to review and approve it.
Sure.
Or disagree with it.
Or disagree with it.
Okay, I get that. What
And
I
the only
thought
way,
I heard
and the only way we
was
can
that
do that is potentially to hire our own professional that does that.
to
regularly.
critique the FCS report.
Well, or to verify it. I'm not saying that they're gonna do it wrong, but I mean, and I'll be quite frank, when FCS said sunset the land at 10 years, that blew up the whole trust in FCS.
Okay.
So.
Okay, thank you.
That's the reality that we're dealing with right here, is that, you know, there was a statement made in that report that not everybody on the board, but enough board members said, what?
Yeah. And I think that stems from his experience and other things. I can't answer for that, but that's something, if that was very specific, concern, allowing him to respond to that would maybe be helpful. He has some very good experience.
10-year sunset out of it, we would all get, yeah, that makes sense.
And I think he also said, that would be up to us if we wanted to take that out. And that's part of that agreement. If you didn't feel comfortable with that, we could modify it.
Matt, further comments from the city?
Just a question for the district. Jim, you started off by saying that the surplus land was of your main concern regarding the land. I want to make this really clear. Are you concerned about all of the land and how that's going to be dealt with, or just the surplus part of it? Because we're talking about the 400 and some acres, or are we talking about whatever is deemed surplus? And I think that's an important distinction. Can you clarify what your concern is of the two?
First of all, we are very concerned if you declare it a surplus. I don't believe that land that is not used for treatment capacity is, today may not be surplus. So, yeah, our main concern is that the city declares it a surplus, sells it, and then uses it for something besides operation and maintenance of the treatment plant.
So again, it's not all of the land, it's just the surplus that you're concerned about. What happens to that?
Well, I mean, you can say to Ken, the city takes it over, and you can say to Ken and EPA and DEQ and say, we're getting rid of the land application, we're taking it all to the river. I'm not saying that's ever going to happen. Then all of a sudden, 470 acres becomes surplus land.
Any land that's sold.
I think what I'm hearing is that they're concerned that the city may at some point call it surplus and sell it and use that money for
Something besides the treatment plant.
not value to the treatment.
Yeah.
We've also,
So
I think we believe we can enter an agreement, but I'm.
Yes.
So it still concerns all the land is what your concern is?
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the city? Okay, we'll shift over to the county. Leslie Bruce.
So Commissioner Matari has to leave, so I'm going to let him go and share his thoughts.
As I was watching everyone talk, I kept asking myself, is this plant an asset or a liability? Right?
Yes.
And ultimately in the end, because it can't generate a profit, its real value is to expand the tax base. I mean, that's really what it is. It allows for growth to expand the tax base. And it sounds like that, some of the concerns are, this land, that if the land goes with the transfer, that it'll get sold and that there'll be some cash that's, there's profit, so to speak. And so one of the main issues is just making sure that land either stays with the plant or any money that's realized from that land gets reinvested in the plant, which I think is an easy line item to address. The other one is that it sounds like no one wants to pay for Hayden's growth of their infrastructure so that they can continue to grow. And at some point, the capacity is hit with that treatment plant, and it'll need to be expanded, which will cost millions of dollars to expand it to accommodate future growth, is the way I understand this with this plan. And then, of course, some sort of an equitable rates that are applied, because you have two different types of users is what I'm kind of seeing here. You have the established user who, if we kept the plant at the same size, you would basically be paying for the user fees and the maintenance costs for the plant. And then you have this other side where you want to grow, and Hayden gets the benefit of using this plant as a mechanism for growing. And that would require capital expansion, basically. And so I think what you want to try to do is avoid having your people pay for the capital expansion so that Hayden can grow, which again, I think you can figure that out. And then at the end, it boils down to how much is your board seat worth to the city of Hayden? You know, what is the value of that? Because Hayden gets the benefit of controlling this entity and allocating its resources without any say from you. You know, and I think that's really what it comes down to as far as just the negotiations, the value proposition here, and what you can do. And I don't know if it would be looked at from a cash perspective or a rebate perspective that comes back. I don't think it can go on in perpetuity because you're no longer managing the entity, and they have to bear the risk that goes with that. Especially with the environmental concerns, which you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you're on the hook for that. But my hope is that, boiling it down to the lowest common denominator will make it the easiest process for everyone to just kind of address these issues. It seems like it's very doable, just boiling it down to those line items. Because I kept hearing numbers and how much was invested, and that's where I kept asking myself, is this an asset or is it a liability? And the asset value is the mechanism to grow and expand your tax base. And the liability side, of course, is that you have the environmental issues as well as the upkeep, the maintenance for it. So that's kind of what I saw, and I think you guys will be able to do this. I think. Everyone's operating in good faith, so I remain very optimistic. And if there's certainly anything that I could contribute, I would be more than happy to.
And then just on the other side is future development at the airport. We want to protect that. We've got, we're kind of out of room. We have a big waiting list, and we will be considering development, I think, sometime in the next 6 to 12 months.
I think it's going on right now.
Okay, sooner than that.
So.
And then, of course, parity rates, just making sure we'll pay for our growth and Hayden pays for their growth and that kind of thing. So, I don't know. Does that cover it?
Can we also put in the agreement that you don't have to move the H3 lift station?
Well, that's a little more complicated with FAA. So,
yeah. FAA is the driver on a lot of these things, but we've been working with them, and I think that we will be able to easily find a good solution to manage to that.
So, all right, that's it.
Having gone around the room, does the district want another opportunity to speak on any of those points?
I agree with the
Go ahead.
I agree with the commissioners that I think this is a doable deal. There's some I think this meeting has allayed some of the fears that this board has, and I think that there's certainly some we're not drawing a line in the sand, even though it may feel like that. There's ways of getting around capacity issues, so you can have you can have 6,000 ERs to sell instead of 1,100. And given the opportunity, I can assure you that the district would be more than happy to help you out on that.
That is good to hear. That'll help me sleep. At least for 19 days.
So, trying to wrap this discussion up in a meaningful manner and give us some direction moving forward. As HARSB's attorney and really as kind of a mediator through this process, my goal is to try to paint a picture, give us a roadmap for what our next steps need to look like at each juncture. And at this point, we've obviously been having these dissolution discussions for the better part of a year now. There's been a lot of concerns that have been shared from both sides. And I think that both parties really understand where the rubber meets the road for each other, right? What are the big issues that the other side wants accounted for in any dissolution? With that said, I'm really going to ask the group and lean on the respective spokespersons from each entity to weigh in on whether or not this proposal makes sense to the groups moving forward. It sounds as if the district is intending on hiring its own consultant to look at the FCS study and identify if there are any differences or opinions otherwise that aren't fully vetted out in the FCS study. Whether or not that has to occur before or after the next step that I'm going to propose is really something I'll need input from the district on. Where I would see the next logical step being in moving this dissolution forward is actually likely for the city to be the one that reduces to writing what its proposal for dissolution would look like. That would give the district an opportunity to see something on paper, give the county an opportunity to see something on paper, and then to say, yeah, you know what, we think we can live with A, B, and C, but we'd really like to take a second look at D, and we would propose as an alternative, you consider X. And I think that really having a working document as a starting point would give this group an opportunity to have more meaningful discussions to identify whether or not dissolution is an amenable option. And the city being the one that is going to bear both the benefit and the potential liability of taking this over, I think is probably in the greatest position of concern in identifying what the structure would need to look like for you to be willing to take on both the benefits and the liabilities that would be associated with dissolution. So those are my thoughts. I'm open to hearing further input from the group.
That works for the county, and our attorney is available whenever needed to have these discussions.
Jim, from the district's perspective, would you be amenable with the city proposing an initial draft for dissolution to the entities, and would you like to have your secondary consultants study completed or running at the same time as they're working on that? Okay.
I'd like the idea of the city putting together a working document. Because right now we're basing this on minutes, recollection, and feelings. We really don't have anything black and white to look at. So I think it's a great idea. I maybe propose it.
Sure. Okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification, Barb. City, from your perspective, and maybe this is a question of timelines for Brett, or maybe it's not a question. Barb's comments are that the district's attorney has not been authorized by the district to do any work toward dissolution at this point, besides receive input and documents.
Yes, briefly talking and hearing, I think we see a way forward, and primarily what we heard from the district on the property, and if that's correct, is that we could address the issue of the property in an agreement by keeping it as an asset, but the concern is that not being used for expansion of the city. areas. And so I think if you're okay, what?
If it were ever sold.
Yeah, if it were ever sold. That we would put some language in there to do so, to protect against utilizing the value of any sold property for expansion of the system. That we could take that on and come up with a draft agreement that we can give to both parties, both of the other parties.
How long does the city anticipate it might need to put something like that together?
Fonda got off. She was in Post Fall, or down in Boise, sorry. And so I don't know how long it might take. Danielle, I'd probably have Danielle help with it as well, with her knowledge of this, everything that's going on. Yeah. Approximately 30 days. And if we need to modify that, we can send something back out and say we might need another 30 days or something. But,
okay. Yeah. So with that understanding in the city's timeline, staff, from HARSB's perspective, does this mean that perhaps we could maybe look at this group reconvening in 60 to 90 days, giving the city an opportunity to have that drafted, sent out to the other entities for approximately a month to discuss and deliberate on, and be able to come back to the table together?
I would recommend January.
Okay.
The 90-day term is
Okay.
the holidays are hard.
I know holidays. So I would recommend sometime in January if you look at the calendars. Is Friday better for everybody? Mornings at 8:30.
As long as it's after January 18th.
Well, we got January 19th and January 26th. Which would you like?
Doesn't matter to me, as long as it's after the 18th.
Does anybody have a preference?
I would probably prefer the 19th over the 26th because I think I'm going to be in Boise that week.
Okay. Oh, yeah, when is that?
Let's see.
Is that the start of legislature for Idaho? Okay, so January 26th would be better probably for everybody then, if they're going down to, 19th.
January 19th.
January 19th would be better, okay.
19th's not good for me.
So my last question then for the group, based upon that timeline, it sounds like this group will be reconvening a little over 3 months from now. Would the entities like to reserve the opportunity potentially for an interim meeting before that date, assuming that the proposal gets circulated, for maybe their attorneys to get together and hash out any preliminary details before the entire group reconvenes? Any thoughts or comments on that? I'm getting some head nods from the city. Does the district have a thought or comment, or do you want to reserve the ability to weigh in on that once you see the draft? Okay. So staff, we won't plan on scheduling an attorney meeting yet, but perhaps once that draft gets circulated, if you can remember to send out a reminder to the entities to ask if they want an attorney meeting in the interim, that may help to facilitate more meaningful discussion for the group. With that said, go ahead, staff.
Set this room up for January 19th at 8:30.
Perfect. With that said, I think that runs us through all of our discussion items. So, Ms. Duncan, if you'd like to take over and close the meeting out with any final matters.
Sure.
Commissioner, I'd like to just say something that, so, like I said, this is not a new premise. This happened in 2006, and I think that the comment that was made in 2006 is probably apropos today. It says, the board has concluded that operation and management of the facility can probably be more efficient with one entity being charged with the operation and maintenance, and also vested with the right to make important decisions affecting the owners. So, and I think we still feel that way. We think it's much more efficient to have one entity operating and maintaining the treatment plant than having a committee operate it.
Thank you, Jim. And for Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board, I will adjourn this meeting, and for Kootenai County, I will adjourn this meeting. So if the respective chairs, Mayor, if you'd like to adjourn your meetings. Okay. And district, your adjourn?
We're adjourned.
Okay, thank you.